Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Hello, folks, and welcome to episode 4 of NHL Wraparound. On today's show, we will start off with a couple of one-timers, and then we'll move into our main topics. The first of which, the impact of backup goaltenders in the NHL this season. Then we'll be joined by our special guest, Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Winnipeg Jets, Kevin Cheveldayoff. And then we will move on, and we'll have a discussion about the Morgan Riley hit over the weekend using his stick and the possible suspension that will be forthcoming. And then we'll wrap it up with our human side of the story. So all that coming up. But first, a word from MyGray.
From Howdy Hughes, from Bellevue to Bedard, we're your source for game-worn jerseys. Go to mygray.com, MEIGRAY.com to start your collection today. Get real. Get it from MyGray.
Vic, one thing I've noticed in the East is that the couple of teams are causing trouble for teams that thought they would make the playoffs and now are out of even the wild card situation. Teams that are causing havoc, Detroit Red Wings and Philadelphia Flyers. Both of them are a lot better this year than I think anybody expected them to be. Detroit, we thought, was maybe another year away from being on a serious playoff team. And Philadelphia, after the summer they had of, bringing in Keith Jones as president, bringing in Danny Briere as general manager. Last year, they fired Chuck Fletcher. It looked like they were in a total burn down, and all of a sudden Coach John Tortorella's got his players playing so well that they're a threat now to make the playoffs. In fact, they're in a playoff position. So that causes havoc for the New York Islanders. It causes havoc for the Tampa Bay Lightning. It causes havoc for those other teams that are on the bubble of making the playoffs. And it's exciting for Detroit to be ahead of your game plan, exciting for Philadelphia, but it's misery for those teams who want to be in the playoffs, who think they should be in the playoffs, but have to claw their way through so many teams to get there now.
Last week we talked about the projections for teams to get in, and in the East it was Detroit setting the bar at 95.1, and that is now actually a little bit higher. It's now 96.5 points to get in, so those clubs indeed now have to make up more ground, and they have less time to do it. So certainly kudos to both the Red Wings and the Philadelphia Flyers. So my one-timer this morning has to do with Brad Marchand, he'll be playing his 1,000th game in Tampa tomorrow night, or on Tuesday night, rather. And I think the interesting thing is it comes on the eve of Valentine's Day, and there's probably been no more polarizing player in the NHL over the last 15 years than Marchand has. But, let's take the good and the bad with this player. The bad is that he's been suspended more than any player in NHL history, and he's lost over $1.4 million in pay in fines. So that's the bad Marchand. The good Marchand is he's 3 goals away from 400. He's 90 points away from 1,000. And the question is now coming up whether he is a Hall of Fame type player. And if you project out, he's going to be 36 in May, probably play at least another 3 or 4 more years. I think he's got 500 goals, 1,200 points in total before his resume wraps up. And, look, he's never going to be an angel, but he's cleaned a lot of stuff up in his game. The low bridge hits, the slew foots, the licking of players of all things. And now he's the captain of the Bruins, who has succeeded Patrice Bergeron. And you look at the skill set, he can skate, he can shoot, He's got great hands. He passes well, and he's got outstanding hockey acumen. And I think when it's all said and done, that he's won a Stanley Cup and he's been to 2 other finals. I think that gets him in the Hall of Fame.
Well, he's an interesting player. He's one of those players that's right on the edge. And which way do you go with him? But he's a small guy, and he came into the league in the old era. I mean, he came in with bigger guys. It wasn't all guys his size, and he had to be a bit of a pit bull to be able to survive in the league. The thing that means the most to me about Marchand is the fact that they made him. That really says something about his character. We knew he was an important player for the Bruins, but when the Boston Bruins, an original 6 team, make you the captain, that's something not to be taken lightly. And I can tell you, Vic, he can guarantee himself a seat in the Hall of Fame if his Bruins win a Stanley Cup, another one. I know he's won one already, but if they win one while he's captain, he's in the Hall of Fame very easily.
No question. And just a reminder that these one-timers were brought to you by Guentzel Wealth Partners of UBS Financial Services. Let's move forward together. And welcome back to Wraparound. So the impact of backup goaltenders this season is very significant in and around the NHL. And entering this week, the NHL average for goals against is 2.90 and save percentage is .904. And the following backups are below both of these numbers. Laurent Brossoit in Winnipeg, Casey DeSmith in Vancouver, Joel Hefner in St. Louis, Alec Nedeljkovic in Pittsburgh, Jonathan Quick in New York, and Anthony Stolarz in Florida. Now, these 3 goalies not only are below these numbers, but they have become the number ones. Joey Daccord in Seattle, Connor Ingram in Arizona, and David Riddick in Los Angeles. And questioning you, Neil, is when you're looking at a team, what's the most important component that you look for when you're bringing in a backup?
I think the most important thing is the chemistry that he's going to have with your number one, and that he's somebody who is okay with being the number 2, or at least the number 1B. When he comes in, he's going to push the starter to keep playing well, but he's also going to be his also his cheerleader in a way, that he wants him to do well. He's not sitting on the bench hoping goals go in so that he gets a chance to play. Personality is a big part of it. You want somebody who's going to be okay with, having to go in on the second game of a back-to-back, when you played the starter against the weaker team, wanting to get those 2 points in the bag, and then you sort of throw the backup to the Wolves on the next night, and against a good team. So, personality has a lot to do with it, and also a chemistry with the starter.
Is there something different in terms of the mental makeup and the toughness of a backup, because they know that they're not getting in as often, and they know that when they get in there, they have to perform?
I think there is. I think that there's a mindset that what I am astonished at in today's Jonathan Quick syndrome, I'll call it, that he could go from being a guy who won 2 Stanley Cups by himself, meaning he was the goaltender of the whole thing for the LA Kings for 2 Stanley Cups. He was part of the Stanley Cup win last year in Vegas, although a very small part. But then signs in New York because that's his childhood favorite team. He grew up in Connecticut and has been outstanding for the Rangers this year in his role, and to the point where he's played better than Shesterkin, who is a Vezina Trophy candidate most years. So, and I think that's going on around the league. You pointed it out with several. There's been 3 actually that you noted. Backups, number 2s, number 1B, that have clearly now taken over the starter position. And you didn't used to see that hardly ever. I can't think of one time ever seeing it in previous eras.
What do you think when we get to the playoffs? And, historically, there have only been really 3 instances since expansion that you've seen anything close to a 50-50 split in terms of games played. In 69, the Canadians won. Rogie Vachon played 8 games. Gump Worsley played 7. And in 1972, Jerry Cheevers played 8 and Eddie Johnston played 7 for the Bruins. And then in Pittsburgh in 2017, Marc-Andre Fleury had 15 games played and Matt Murray had 11. But interestingly, the last 2 Cup champions have seen more kind of like a 2/3, 1/3 split. Colorado in 22, Darcy Kemper 16 games, Pablo Francouz 7. And then even last year, Aiden Hill 16 and Laurent Brossoit, who is with Winnipeg now, played 8 games. So do we see this kind of trending more that if you're going to win a Stanley Cup, maybe there's going to be a little bit more of balance between the 2 goaltenders?
Well, it certainly is a current trend, and it makes you wonder if, in fact, the day of the franchise goalie on the Stanley Cup team is gone. So what I mean by that is Patrick Waugh, Marty Brodeur, Mike Richter, you can mention a number of them. They were star goaltenders, and it was a thought, in my theory back then, you had to have a all-star goaltender to win the Stanley Cup. You had to, the guy with the best goalie won the Stanley. Eddie Belfour won a Stanley Cup. And I guess those days are gone. I mean, Vasilevsky is certainly a franchise goaltender. There's no doubt about it. And he won 2 cups in a row. But is that still the most thing like it used to be? It seems like it's not, because Vegas clearly won the cup last year, riding the back of somebody that I'd never heard of, until last season. So we're going to see this year whoever eventually wins what their goaltending turns out to be. Will they ride the one horse all the way there, or will they, as you're talking about, split it?
To me, it's going to be a fascinating sidebar story as we wait the playoffs and see them evolve through to the end of June. You've heard me sharing how much I love my Dura jeans. And I have to tell you, the people that know me are well aware I'm not showing up on any of PK Subban's fashion segments anytime in the near future. But I will say that I was out for dinner the other night wearing my Dura jeans, and I was styling.
And how much food did you drop in your lap?
Actually, none. I don't have to wash them for the next time that I go out.
Well, but they will be. You won't have any bacteria in there anyway, so don't worry about it.
That's right, but I'm going to still look great also. And let me tell you something. Dura made stretch performance denim and lifestyle apparel for men and women. Plus, Dura is committed to using 85% plant-based materials for natural softness and comfort. Trust me, you need Dura in your wardrobe. Order your new favorite jeans today. Check out Dura's flagship stores in LA or Denver, or shop online at shopdura.com/NHL fan. Right now, our listeners can get 15% off site-wide when you use our special URL. Shop DUER.com/NHL fan. Don't wait to get 15% off. Go to shopdoor.com/NHL fan.
So now it's my pleasure to bring into NHL Wraparound the Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Winnipeg Jets, the only General Manager the new version of the Winnipeg Jets have ever had, and that's Kevin Cheveldayoff. And Kevin, thank you so much for being with Vic and I on this show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on today.
Kevin, I see Butch Goring all the time at the Islander games. And I said to him the other day, I said, we're going to have your buddy Chevy on the show coming up. And I said, I didn't realize how much time you two guys put in together, with both him coaching you and also you being his assistant coach.
Well, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for Butch, quite honestly. And it's a really kind of ironic story because Butch was, my coach in Capital District Islanders in the American Hockey League for 3 seasons. And at that point in time, you had 4-year entry-level contracts. And so I went to play my final year in that contract in Salt Lake City, where the Islanders moved their affiliate. But it was the following year that Butch ended up taking over in Denver as a new team, Denver Grizzlies. And actually, he had hired Bob Bourne as his assistant coach. And then Bob had to step away for family reasons. So I was wanting to play still, and I didn't have a contract. And I got this phone call in early August from Butch, and I had just gotten married, and I told my wife. Butch called, and thinking he's going to ask me to come play for him in Denver, and so I got on the phone with him, and he said, we talked it through, and he said, Chevy, he said, I got a unique opportunity for you here. I'd like to offer you to the assistant coach, assistant general manager position. And I said, Butch, I still want to play. And he says, well, you know what? Think about it. So I went back and I called my agent at the time. And I said, we got to think it through. It's early August. I don't have a job. I've been hounding him all summer to try to find me a job. And I get on the phone with him and I said, I just got a call from Butch Goring. He offered me, he goes, take it. I go, but I didn't tell you what he offered me. And he said, doesn't matter, Chevy. He says, you know what, whatever the offer is, it's better than what I've got, so take it. So I got into coaching and managing through Butch. We won a couple of championships, and then that led into the being offered the GM job to Chicago Wolves. But if I don't get that phone call from Butch in August and him, the relationship that we had as a coach player at the time, I wouldn't be sitting here today.
That's everybody needs a break. I know Vic and I talk about that all the time in his broadcast industry, and Stan Fischler gave him his break at the very beginning. Jimmy D gave me a break in with the New York Islanders, and Al Arbour really working for him. But let's get to the Jets, because obviously that's what we want to talk about. You guys just came thankfully out of a slump, a little bit of a slump. I've managed through slumps before, but this was a little bit out of the ordinary, because it was 5 games, which in a normal, part of the season would be maybe 2 weeks. You'd suffer through it, and you had to suffer for 21 days. It was losing 5 games in a row, but it took 21 days because of the All-Star break. And I guess my question to you is, being a former GM, you being a current one, how do you handle a slump from the GM chair? Do you stay in your office? Do you go down and try to keep Rick Bowness motivated? What do you do during that?
Well, so, you are correct. It was a unique situation. So we had just come off the heels of and I can't even remember now. Then that's the thing. You go on a streak the other way, the winning side of it, you can't remember. But I think came close to setting a National League record for, consecutive games, not giving up more than 3 goals. And, we ended up, I think we lost that streak to the Bruins. So that was a tough game. And then the next game we went into Toronto, and we played to a 0-0 draw, essentially, and then lost in overtime, 1-0. And then we had a back-to-back home and home with Toronto, and came home here and unfortunately lost. And that was within a span of like 4 days. So you go from riding the high of highs, with the streak that on the winning side of it, which, like you said, I can't even remember now, and to going to obviously, losing or winless in 3, I guess, when you lose in overtime, and then going into a break. So, the break obviously I think lasted 10 days, and through that period of time, things heated up on the trade front side, and we ended up trading for Sean Monahan. So that really kind of broke things up, from that standpoint. It was a pretty busy break when it came from that perspective, and so we had to dig in quite hard in trying to get the trade done, and came out on the break on the other side. And obviously when you don't win your first game and then don't win your second game, things start to weigh on you. But, we played well here at home here the other night against Pittsburgh. They're fighting for their lives to try to stay in the hunt. And, it was a hard fought game and now you got to put that behind you and just, focus on the task at hand. And the next game is always the most important one here. And, for us, we've got a couple of days of practice and I know that, Bones, at this time of the year, you relish those opportunities to have a practice because, the time gets, so crunched. And as we even move forward here, March, I think we have 16 games in March. So it's, it's going to be a sprint to the finish.
Kevin, you mentioned the Sean Monahan deal, acquiring him from Montreal, and that came on the heels of Vancouver acquiring Elias Lindholm from the Calgary Flames. So in a situation like this, are you reacting to that move a little bit quicker because a contender has already made a trade, and if you don't move quickly, that player may move off the board?
Well, I think, as a group, we've had meetings on the pro side of it and amateur side of it. You're getting ready for, the different avenues of your organization. But you identify, I think, your internal needs and you also identify the potential options out there. And we identified those two players as the top two options for our particular, need at the time. And one thing you can't control is when the other team is going to, sell or pull the trigger on a trade. So, you just have to be nimble and ready. And fortunately for us, the two teams, I guess, decided to make their moves and we were able to match the asking price and, that they were willing to sell for. So, it's all timing. You just don't know, like March 8th deadline, allows for certain things, it allows for roster expansion and so that's why you see a lot of different things. We were fortunate that, fortunate and unfortunate. We created a roster spot because we were thinking that, something might be happening. And unfortunately, we lost that player on waivers. But we needed to have that spot in order to, make that trade. So lots of things behind the scenes, lots of decisions that go into it. Again, fortunately, we were able to come up with the player that we wanted.
I just want to follow that up because there are four names that appear to be at the top of the trade bait list, so to speak. Jake Guentzel, Chris Tanev, Noah Hanafin, and Adam Henrique on Anaheim. And as the deadline gets closer, we know that, with the draft, you're looking at teams and how they're picking and your strategy changes or stays the same based on those picks. Do you have different scenarios based on which player may go first? Are there a series of scenarios that you're working with based on the player that moves first?
Well, for us, that scenario presented itself with, the trades that we identified. What for us, I guess, in our own situation here, we're going to take the time to between now and the deadline to, assess our team, assess our needs. It might not be the big fish. It might be, nibbling around the edges. It might be nothing at all. We have some internal players. We have a young player that, essentially made our team out of training camp and then broke his ankle in Ville Heinola. That's a young defenseman within our organization that he's back playing now. He needs to get games under his belt at the American League level, but that might be our own internal addition. So there's lots of things that might come into play, might not. And again, the positionally is the most important thing, but for us, it always has to come down to fit. We've got a good group of guys here. We've got real good chemistry. You're going to have your ups and downs, like Neil said, through the season. But, we think this group, has earned, its right, to try to do this together as well. And you can go back over the course of time. Sometimes it's the additions that push you over the top. But, you look at some teams that only nibble around the edges at the trade deadline and they continue on. So, we'll just, we'll evaluate, we'll be ready. And if we choose to go in a direction, then we'll be decisive.
Listening to that, Vic, listening to Kevin, things have changed, but they've stayed the same. My decision making wasn't far off of that. I think there was less complications back in the 90s, but the decision making process, it just sounds right like it used to be for me, even back making 4 trades on deadline day way back when. But I want, Kevin, your team is, and I should preface it by saying, in the modern day NHL, every year I get surprised by teams that are quickly really good or quickly really bad. And I'll give you an example, like Vancouver this year. Like, I didn't see that coming, that they would be this good. Last year, I didn't see that Jersey was going to be as good as they were last year. They both caught me by surprise. In the Winnipeg Jets situation, judging it from my chair, which is a million miles away, I saw what happened last year in the playoffs with Vegas, and then Bones was pretty upset with his team and your team, and he made that pretty well known. And so during, in the early off season, there might have been thoughts, well, Chevy will probably make a change either at the coaching level, or they'll start to do something to, move this group on to rebuild. But you didn't do that. You kept obviously the right move, and you re-signed Hellebuyck and Scheifele to long-term contracts, and you discharged a couple of players, and you haven't looked back. Now you're a contender, a legitimate contender in the league. And I just bring that up to get your reaction to that, because from the outside, you've done everything right. And I know sometimes as a manager, you can try your best and nothing goes right. And other times you can fall into it. But you're keeping the coach and re-signing your 2 franchise players. Could you speak to that?
Sure. Well, so I go back to the playoffs, and obviously, it's an emotional time when you're in the playoffs and you're playing for the Stanley Cup. Obviously 16 teams have been eliminated already, and you get the honor of moving on. So, when we got into that series, it had its ups and downs as well. But, unfortunately in the end, like we ended up losing, Josh Morrissey, early in, I think it was, game 3. And, he was done. Like, he wasn't going to come back until probably the 3rd round. Then we lost Mark Scheifele to an injury as well. And so we didn't have him for, most of game 4 and all of game 5. So I think people forget that, obviously they remember the emotions that Bones had at the end of it. But you have to understand one thing. Bones is, there's been, no other coach that's been behind the bench in some capacity more than Rick Bowness in the National Hockey League history. He's doing this for one reason and one reason only, and that's to win a Stanley Cup. So when you have that ability or that opportunity taken away from you because you lose, it's emotional. And one thing that Bones is authentic, and he, he's a pull no punch type of guy, but he's like all those players' grandfathers, so to speak, too. Those guys want to play hard for him and go through a wall for him. So it was an emotional time, and we had emotional exit meetings as well. At the end, I talked to a lot of the guys, because a lot of the players in our organization we drafted, we developed. Some guys we traded for, but most of them, we signed over a period of time and have re-signed, long term or whatever. But there was an emotional, situation because they want to win. So obviously we had some decisions to make in the summertime, and we did. We moved. We parted ways with Blake Wheeler mutually. Essentially we bought him out, and that allowed for us to complete the transition of our leadership group into a player that we now have as captain, Adam Lowry. That was our 2nd pick that we drafted in that first year that we came back, so that became kind of a starting point when it came to that. We obviously made a trade at the draft and acquired Gabe Vilardi and Alex Iafallo and Rasmus Kupari in a 2nd round pick, and I think at that point in time, some of the players that were pending, UFAs that kind of wanted to take their time and make some decisions. I think when we made that trade, that really kind of signaled to them that, like, we're not throwing in the towel here. We're trying to kind of keep pushing this forward. And if you want to be a part of it, then, let's be a part of it. And so I sat down with both Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuyck at, when they got back from summer at training camp. And we talked about, what we want to do as an organization. And, again, these players, were drafted here. These players grew up here. And two things became apparent in both those conversations that I had with Mark and Connor was that they have an insatiable desire to want to win a championship. That was one. But the second thing that came up is that they really care about these guys and they want to win that championship here. And so that's, we hammered out the long-term deals and was a special announcement where we got both of those players done on the same day. And I think, that there was no looking back from training camp on at that point.
Well, you certainly have been pushing all the right buttons, I'll tell you, since last year's playoffs. And Vic and I really want to thank you for doing this, taking the time to do this. I know how busy it is for a GM. You're getting calls constantly and all the different little stuff you got to go through with people wanting tickets and everything else. People don't realize it goes from soup to nuts when you're the GM. But Kevin, thanks for taking the time to come on with us.
Well, I really want to I thank you guys for having me on. Neil, you've been such a good friend over the years and, a mentor in a lot of different ways. So it was great to hear that, you guys had a podcast going here, and it's a pleasure to be a part of it.
Well, thanks so much
Kevin.
for doing it. We really appreciate it. Your first GM, by the way. You're the first GM on the show.
Thanks. Awesome.
Well, now it's time for a quick shout out to our sponsor. NHL Wraparound is brought to you by MyGray, your source for game-worn jerseys. Head to mygray.com. That's MEIGRAY.com to get your collection started today. Get real. Get it from MyGray.
We were at UBS Arena last week, and we met with Barry Mizell, who is the big honcho at MyGray, and he was given a Matt Snell jersey from Super Bowl III that the New York Jets won their only championship in. And to prove its authentication, he took a little look on the sleeve here where there was a green patch that was covering up a tear, and he used a piece of videotape to actually match things up for the preliminary authentication. So the stretch that they go to authenticate their products is pretty remarkable, and it was really something to see in person.
Well, he's a perfectionist. Barry's a perfectionist in authentication. You're not going to get anybody better than them.
This past Saturday night, a little bit of an ugly incident at the end of the Ottawa-Toronto game. Just to set the stage, Ridley Gregg of the Ottawa Senators had a clear path to an empty net and decided to take a slap shot from the top of the crease, in which Toronto defenseman Morgan Riley reacted and went after Gregg with his stick. If I'm a fan, I'm irate. I understand the team reacting and that basically this was a middle finger to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And if I'm a fan, I'm outraged also. But nonetheless, it's an incident that Riley is likely going to get a suspension, Neil, and that'll be decided sometime on Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, well, let's set the stage too, Vic, for folks that aren't from Ontario or don't know this rivalry. First of all, it is a heated rivalry. The two teams both play in the province of Ontario. Ottawa has, for the last number of years, been well behind Toronto in the standings. And when you go to an Ottawa Senators game when the Leafs are playing, half the building is Toronto Maple Leaf jerseys. So you've got a lot of Toronto fans in that building for cheering for the road team. And Toronto has been under fire lately for not reacting to things in the right way or overreacting to things. Their captain, John Tavares, got into a scrum a few games ago and nobody came to his aid. Brad Marchand was mouthing off at their bench and nobody did anything about it back a ways days ago. So I'm sure that in the back of all the players' minds was, well, we can't keep letting people, we can't keep putting on the impression that we're not willing to fight for our team. And that clearly, though, was an overreaction to something that was clearly we know in hockey, that's a way to say screw you, the way that he put that puck into the net.
I think what's going to be interesting here is the way supplemental discipline is going to be handed out. And the episode that comes closest to mind happened back on December 9th when David Perron went after Artem Zub, also of the Ottawa Senators. And he went after Zub, who was in the vicinity of Dylan Larkin, who had been hit by two other players. So he went after a player that wasn't even involved in the situation, and Perron wound up getting 6 games. Then you had Blake Lizotte of LA last season going after Josh Morrissey. He got 1 game. And then back in 1987, Dave Brown hit Tomas Sandstrom of the Rangers and got 15 games. Brown was a member of the Philadelphia Flyers. And then even early this season, Jacob Trouba whacked Trent Frederick of the Bruins on the side of the helmet and only got a $5,000 fine. So I guess the discipline that is meted out is just all over the place. Any way that we could break that down, that there could be some clarity as to the rhyme or reason to why some players are given heavier suspensions and others aren't?
It's very subjective, as you say. I mean, every time that a player is suspended or fined, they either have a on the phone hearing, that's if it's going to be, under 5 games, or they have a in-person hearing that's offered to the player. And, when that happens, it's probably going to be 6 games. So I think it is individually very subjective. It's not cookie cut. I'm not saying that it should or shouldn't be cookie cutter. You can try to relay this stuff to other things that go on in society. What do you get for a car crash or an accident where you hit the other guy? You're at fault. If you're behind, you're at fault and you're in trouble. It doesn't work that way in hockey, in the National Hockey League, on the way that they do the discipline. Jacob Trouba, his infraction was outrageous on video, but both Frederick and that they didn't think that they did it on purpose. Like Trouba said, I didn't do it on purpose, and Frederick said he didn't think Trouba did it on purpose. So then they sort of let him off the hook. There's one other incident too, Vic, that we didn't mention that comes to mind on this Riley infraction, and that is when Pierre Turgeon got hurt by Dale Hunter after he scored a goal on Washington. So Turgeon of the Islanders scored against Washington, and Hunter blatantly took him down with a cross check or a hit. I can't remember what it was, but similar to that.
It was more of a blindside hit.
Right. And this is
the final game in their 1993 playoff series.
Correct. And but this is similar in that, you go up and take umbrage on a goal scorer, and the league can't be allowing people can't score a goal without getting taken out. I mean, that's just can't happen. I mean, if you celebrate in a bad way, do you get to take the guy down because you don't like his celebration? I mean, the guy that scored the goal, I didn't like it, and he had to know people are coming. You do that slap shot into an empty net, people are coming. But I thought people would be coming to fight, not people are coming to give you a cross check in the head.
And this is going to be an in-person hearing, so the likelihood of at least 6 games is very possible. And probably the Maple Leafs' attitude that thinking that this was still an appropriate action, I don't think is going to help their case at all.
No, I don't think what Sheldon Keefe said after the game is going to help their case at all. But, and again, the coach probably has to stick up for his players, but to say that it was appropriate, and the other thing is, you talk to non-hockey people about this incident, they don't have a clue of why this is even thought of as possibly appropriate. And why is it such a big deal that he took a slap shot into the net? Like, come on, what are you guys, like babies? Like, and I'm trying to explain both sides of this thing. And it's hard for people who don't know the game. And they get this impression of hockey when these things happen, that it's just Neanderthal. Guy can't score a goal without getting cross-checked in the head. Like, what kind of this? So the league it's a complicated issue for the league.
Sure. But just the optics of it are one of the things that for the longest time, when you try to sell a non-hockey fan on hockey, and this is what they see, it's a hard thing to sell to them.
It sure is.
And we wrap up our show with the human side of the story, brought to you by UBS Financial Services. 37 years ago this week, I worked my first event for ESPN. It was an event called Rendezvous 87, held in Quebec City. And it was a 2-game series between NHL All-Stars and the Soviet Red Army to benefit the NHL Players' Pension Fund. And the thing I remember about that, Neil, was we took a bus from Bristol, Connecticut, the ESPN headquarters, and it was about an 8-hour ride. And I remember that the temperature was relatively warm in Bristol, but by the time we got to the Canadian border, it kind of gave us a sense of how cold it was up there. And I know for people in Edmonton and Winnipeg, they're probably going to scoff at me, but I'd never been that cold with temperatures in the sub-teens and wind holding at about 30 or 40 miles an hour all week, whipping off the St. Lawrence. But what I most remember, besides the great atmosphere and the great hockey that was played, the two teams split the games, was the folks that were on that show. Producers Bruce Connell and Barry Sachs, both dear friends, and commentators Tom Mees and John Saunders. And unfortunately, none of those four are with us now. But boy, when I look back at the career that I have had in broadcasting, meeting folks like that was absolutely a treasure. And those are four great guys that I remember on the anniversary of that Rendezvous event. And Neil, I know that you were particularly close with John.
Yeah, when John and I played hockey at Western Michigan together and became best of friends forever. And his passing was a horrible thing for me personally and for his family, obviously, and was way too early. And that's why you got to live life every day and get the most out of it, because you don't know how long we've got. And that's a great story, Vic. That's a wonderful story. I remember Rendezvous 87. I went to Quebec for a little bit of it scouting. But speaking of that, of the 80s, I was running the New York Islanders summer hockey school. That's how little I was getting paid by the Islanders, by the way, that I had to work a hockey school to make sure that I could pay my rent. And I ran the hockey school with Rich Torrey. Rich Torrey was the son of Bill Torrey, the Hall of Fame general manager of the New York Islanders. And we ran this hockey school out of Kaniok Park on Long Island, which is where the Islanders practiced. Very humble arena, very humble dressing room for the Islanders back in the day. And, we had kids that were counselors that helped us, that, did it for the ice time and for the ability to be able to play hockey in the summer and things like that. Now, this was 1982. You can do the math. Today is 2024. So it was 42 years ago. And, I realized in the last year that the counselors that we had there were Perry Florio, great kid, and Jimmy Hughes, great kid. And I suddenly awoke to the understanding that little Jimmy Hughes that worked at my hockey school as our counselor was now the father of Jack Hughes, Luke Hughes, and Quinn Hughes, all stars in the NHL. And I guess it was me and whatever I said to him in those days at the Islander Hockey School that put that in him, that he could have 3 offsprings that made it to the NHL as superstars. I must have told him something magical. I must have taught him something that he passed on to those kids to make them the players they are today. So I'm sure I should get all the credit for it. I don't want to take all that credit. Obviously, though, it's really fun that I knew Jimmy way back then, and now his sons are dominant players in the NHL, having great careers. And so hopefully I get to see Jimmy, and who knows, Vic, maybe we can get him on NHL Wraparound.
Perhaps we can. And how great that the impact that you had back then, and knowing that the 3 Hughes brothers are going to have such an impact on the NHL for years and years to come. So that will do it for another edition of NHL Wraparound. Thanks to MyGray, UBS, Dewar, and Guentzel Wealth Partners. Thanks to our listeners. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Join us next Tuesday for more NHL discussion on NHL Wraparound. See you then.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.